Well, good morning and Happy New Year to everybody. I have a greeting. I met a new friend over the Christmas time. And her name is Alexa. And she is amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. There is practically nothing she doesn't know. You can ask her any question and she will have the answer for it. You can ask her what the weather is going to be tomorrow. You can ask her the time. You can ask her the collective name of mongooses. You can ask her anything at all, and she will have the answer. She'll play you practically any music you can think of. There's a couple of tracks by Robert Johnson that I have been searching for years. I asked her to play them, and she did, just like that. She's my new best friend. I mean, she is just amazing. I can even play like a little intro on my guitar, and she'll recognize what the song is. Not every time, but that's more to do with my guitar playing than her knowledge. But she is great. However, she does have a little bit of a flaw. She's a little bit, well, paranoid, if I'm being honest. I happened to be in the room with another person, and the other person noticed this thing sitting there. So, oh, is that Alexa? And before I had time to say yes or no, Alexa's ears opened up and she said, "Can I help you?" And my friend was so astonished at this. He said, "Oh my goodness, that is amazing." And Alexa said, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question." So I said, "Oh, you didn't understand the question because I wasn't talking to you." She then went on to play a 1930s swing song called "I Wasn't Talking to You." So she gets a little confused at times, and she doesn't always totally understand what it is you're asking. But I mean, that's not unique to Alexa. That happens to us all. In fact, between Christmas and New Year, Carol and I went down to England for a bit. In fact, my earliest memories in childhood, I decided to go and visit that area. Haven't been there in however long, and I thought, well, I'll go there. I'm getting old now. Have a look at it. So I took Carol down to the very first house I could ever remember living in, and it was on an Air Force base in England, and we went down there. And then I went to the very first coastal resort I could remember playing on sand in, a place called Creetops, and we went there. And we had a great time, but a large percentage of my family still live in that area. This is fun. Anyway, so now I have a nephew there who we know quite well, and he's visited here a few years ago, and so we had dinner with him. And when I go chatting, he's telling me about something I said to him 4 or 5 years ago when he was up in Glasgow or something, and how it changed what he was doing. And the thing he said, I told him, there's no way I would ever have told him that. It's just, and I listened to it, and I think, I didn't say that. In fact, I said, kind of like the opposite of that. It was a trivial thing, so it had no huge effect, but nonetheless, he had me say something I never said. Like Alexa had me say something I never said. And I got to thinking about it, and you know that phrase, people hear what they want to hear. Well, it's so true. I mean, even if we use, or I use a phrase like, I do not want to do that, or I do not agree with that. Now you can say that, but when you put do and not in the same phrase, people hear what they want to hear. If they do want to do it, they hear the do. And if they don't want to do it, they hear the not. But they seldom put the two together. I'm getting to a point now. And when I was thinking about that, I got to be thinking about our relationship with the Lord and what He has to say to us. Now, I've said this before. I hear so often people say to me, I don't know what the Lord wants me to do. Well, if people don't know what the Lord wants me to do, it's because they're not listening. Because the Lord isn't keeping that secret. He's laying it out there. The thing is, might not know what the Lord wants us to do, but we do know what we would like the Lord to want us to do. And we certainly know what we don't want the Lord to want us to do. So, those two things can really cloud our judgment, really cloud our relationship with the Lord. And you get into a situation, and I'm talking from experience, where you this is what God's will is for me. I believe that. But then you get going when you think, I don't really, this bit, I'm keen on that. Yeah, maybe that's not what I was going to take that one in. And that bit there, we'll take that one in. And before you know it, you've got a bit of a hybrid going there, which is half your will and half the Lord's will. And of course, if it's half your will, then it's not the Lord's will. And you're doing something else. And the Lord's kind of standing back and just waiting for us to listen. Because we try and make it comfortable for ourselves. We try and develop God's will for ourselves into something that we can live with. But the thing is, we're settling for something less, much less than what it should be. Because if we're actually doing the Lord's will, where it may look complicated, it may look difficult, but if that's the Lord's will, it's going to be brilliant. It's going to work out so well. People say to me, I don't think it's God's will because it's so difficult. It wouldn't be so difficult if it was God's will. It's nonsense. God never said it's going to be easy, but He always says it's going to be possible. So, if it's possible, and God wants you to do it, we can change the world. But if we stick our own hybrid bit into it, we're just treading water, waiting for the time when we can actually listen to what God has to say and go on with what He wants us to do. Amen.
Morning, y'all. Good to see everybody in church this morning. Good to have Robert and Carol back with us. I was just, as you were talking about misunderstood statements, I was reminded, I had to call my doctor's office this week and make an appointment to go back in for some follow-up test. And I called the practice and I said I need to come in sometime, maybe next week, and have some blood work done. And the receptionist said, okay, well, how about, it's actually tomorrow, how about this date? And she said, and we have 10 to 12 available. And I thought, well, that seems like an awful long time, 2 hours for blood work. And, but I said, okay, that'd be fine. She said, okay, and she went on and did it, and then she said, okay, so that's 10 to 12 on Monday the 7th. I said, so I should be there at 10? She said, no, 10 to 12. So when should I be there? She said, 10 to 12, 11:50. 10 to 12. So, yeah. So I knew what she was saying, I just didn't understand what she was saying. One of my favorite poets is Walt Whitman. And probably my favorite poem by Walt Whitman is from his collection called Leaves of Grass. And it's a poem called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. And I'd like to share it with you all this morning. It goes like this. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself into the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. In this poem, Whitman is drawing a contrast between the attempt by the lecturer at really controlling the mysteries of the universe, trying to nail them down, reducing them to manageable proofs and charts and diagrams, so much data to be measured. An exercise in lecturing, offering words that often draw much applause and accolade from an audience. Whitman is contrasting that with mystical revelation, with the search for truth in the mysterious magic of silence and awe at the night sky, at creation. Today is Epiphany. And Epiphany marks the end of the Christmas season and a beginning of a little bit of what we call ordinary time. And on Epiphany, we remember the journey of the Magi, the wise men, the three kings, who traveled to find Jesus, guided by a new star in the heavens. And each year at this time, I post this on Facebook just to remind everyone that indeed Christmas is over and that today is Epiphany. That's Stephen King, Don King, and Larry King. Three kings. Epiphany, of course, is more than just a day. It's also a literary and a psychological term. We say of ourselves sometimes, or of a character in a book or a story, that they had an epiphany. When we say that, we're describing a moment of revelation. But an epiphany is much more than just figuring something out, than acquiring some knowledge. It's deeper than that. The word epiphany first appears in English around 1300, so about 800 years ago. For about 300 years after that, from 1300 to 1600, it referred only to the religious feast day. Epiphany meant the day today, Epiphany, the feast of the three kings. But by the mid-1600s, Epiphany, without a capital E, began to be used in the English language. And it was used to refer to when Christ appears to someone, or when an angel appears to someone, or the Virgin Mary. That was an epiphany. But after around probably the 19th century or so, the meaning of epiphany expanded to mean basically any time you have a revelation, an illuminating discovery, when you realize some insight. A good definition of an epiphany is a moment of sudden or great revelation that usually changes you in some way. One of my favorite definitions of epiphany is Maya Angelou, the American poet Maya Angelou. I'm talking a lot about American poets today, I guess. She said, "Epiphany is the occurrence when the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul focus together and see an old thing in a new way." So today is Epiphany, also known as Three Kings Day. We call the Magi the Three Kings, the wise men, the Magi, even though Matthew, the only gospel writer who mentions them, only uses the word Magi to describe them. And he doesn't say there were three of them. That's come about really because there are three gifts that they bring. Some scholars believe there could have been as many as a dozen of them. In the Western Church, though, in tradition, we've said that the three kings are Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. But Matthew doesn't tell us that. He only uses that word Magi. The singular of that word is magos. See up there. And he tells us that they're from the east. That word magos really means a member of a class called the Magi, and it can sometimes mean a sorcerer, an astrologer. Scholars now are pretty much in agreement that the Magi belong to an ancient religious tradition called Zoroastrianism. And they were likely members of a priestly class, whether they were kings or not. They were definitely experts in astrology, which was at that time regarded as a science. That is, they observed and interpreted the stars, searching for truth and meaning in them. They were also likely to have been experts in other fields as well, other sciences like medicine. And some say that the gifts that they brought Jesus were medicinal, right? Used for things like arthritis and all sorts of other things. The word magic, M-A-G-I-C, has the same root as magi, because the things that they did seemed magical. Matthew tells us about the Magi very close to the beginning of his gospel. At the start of chapter 2. In chapter 1, he tells us Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Abraham. And then he tells us that Mary was pregnant, and an angel appeared to Joseph and said, take her as your wife anyway. But then that brings us to chapter 2. So not a whole lot happens in Matthew's gospel before the Magi show up, right at the beginning. What we find in chapter 2 is this. Matthew writes, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men, Magi, came from the east, came to Jerusalem, asking, where's the child who was born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay homage. When they heard the king, they set out. There ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Last week's sermon was entitled Losing Jesus. And we looked at Luke's story about when Mary and Joseph took Jesus to Jerusalem and then left without him. And then Jesus got in kind of trouble from his mom because she said, what are you doing? How could you do this to us? Don't you know what kind of agony you put us through for the last 3 days? But this week, we're finding Jesus. And I want to contrast in these scriptures that we've just looked at from Matthew's Gospel, who does find Jesus and who doesn't. Now, as we look at this passage, one of the first things I notice is that Matthew is not ambiguous about who Jesus is. He's right up front. The Magi ask, where is the King of the Jews? And the scribes and the priests quote the prophet Micah regarding the Messiah's birthplace. There's no question about who Micah is talking about, who the scribes and the priests are talking about. This person is the Messiah. If that wasn't enough, Matthew has already told us in the very first sentence of his gospel that Jesus is the Messiah. He tells us, here's the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. So there's no confusion about what is happening here. The Messiah has arrived. The long-awaited one, the ruler who will shepherd God's people, Israel. And so it's not surprising that the king, Herod, and all of Jerusalem with him, we are told in verse 3, was frightened. Now, why might that be? The answer is simple. If the Messiah has arrived, it's the end of the world as we know it, or as they know it. Things are about to change, and dramatically. Now, of course, Herod can't have that. He is in a position of power and authority. Change is not a good thing. He's quite comfortable with where he is at the time. He responds to the situation by recruiting the Magi to find Jesus for him so that he can pay him homage. Herod, of course, is not fooling anyone. We all know that what he really wants to do is get rid of Jesus, get rid of the Messiah, because he threatens his authority. You can't have two kings in a kingdom. He threatens the structure of things as they are, the status quo. And we see later in chapter 2 the lengths that he will go to maintain his authority when he slaughters all the baby boys in and around Bethlehem. He is not above resorting to violence to assert his authority. And in fact, historians tell us that he often dealt with his competition in similar violent ways. And so, here are these verses. We see that Herod, even with the help of the scribes and priests, doesn't find Jesus. Not just because the Magi don't come back to him and tell him where he is, but because he's not really looking for Jesus. He's looking for a way to preserve the status quo. He's searching to preserve his authority, to maintain control, to prevent the change that the arrival of the Messiah will inevitably bring. And this doesn't just apply to Herod, it's true for us as well. If we search for security in the status quo, the preservation of things as they are, we will never find Jesus. If we are resistant to the radical transformation that Jesus' arrival brings with it, we will not find Jesus. It's a testimony to just how radical a transformation Jesus' arrival brings with it when we realize who does find Jesus in these passages. These Magi, these three kings. It's interesting, if you think of the Magi as kings, to think of this as a little story about 5 kings. You've got the 3 kings from the east, you've got King Herod, and you've got the new king who has just arrived, Jesus. And looking at the contrasting ways that the kings from far away and King Herod respond to the arrival of this new king. Anyway, it's a pretty radical thing that these Magi from far away are the messengers that God chooses to bring the news of Jesus' birth to Herod and to the chief priests and scribes. Let's think about what that means. These Magi, these wise men, these 3 kings, are not part of the inner circle of Jerusalem. They're not even Jewish. They're leaders from far away, members of a different religion, scientists who study the skies, not experts in Jewish law or prophecy, but God uses their faith and knowledge, their search for truth and meaning to bring them to Christ. More ironic, God uses scientists who practice another religion to let King Herod and the chief priests and scribes in on the news that the Messiah had arrived. They're unlikely messengers. It's not Herod or the chief priests and scribes who find Jesus here. It's these three wise men, these three magi from far away who noticed a change in the skies. The Magi find Jesus because they were looking for truth and meaning, because they were open to the mystery of revelation. And unlike Herod, they didn't resist the change that was coming. A change that Matthew is letting us know affects the whole world. I think the story of the Magi can tell us something about what John Wesley called prevenient grace, which is sometimes a confusing term. Prevenient grace is the grace that God extends to us while we are yet sinners, that draws us to Him like a star in the night sky, even when we don't fully understand what that means. Even if we're foreign scientists practicing another religion, God reveals Himself. As we leave Christmas behind and enter ordinary time, let's look for the divine revelation in the ordinary. Let's be open to seeing God's hand in the everyday, in the world around us. And of course, let's encourage others in their search for truth and meaning. Because a search for truth and meaning will inevitably end up finding Jesus.
Amen. Let's stand together and sing.
Word of the Father now in flesh appearing. Lord, we thank you that you have revealed yourself in the incarnation. We thank you for the privilege of following you. We ask that you would give us strength for our path and give us the words to speak the good news of the gospel to those in our community. We ask this in the name of your Son.